The static from the VHF radio cut through the command tent like a blade. It was August 14th, 1996, just after dawn, when Park Ranger Dennis Wolfe heard the transmission that would reopen a case 4 years cold. A hiker near Lost Creek Trail had reported a woman, disoriented and alone, repeating a single name over and over: Sarah, Sarah. The woman had been identified through emergency medical response as Emily Carpenter, age 27. She and her identical twin sister, Sarah, had disappeared without a trace in July 1992 during a camping trip in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. For 4 years, their case had remained one of Montana's most baffling, unsolved disappearances. Now Emily was alive, dehydrated and suffering from exposure, but alive, and she was calling for Sarah. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy deep, real-world investigations. Dennis had been part of the original search operation in '92. He remembered the heat, the false leads, the growing dread as days turned to weeks. Now, standing in the morning light with that radio transmission echoing in his mind, he felt something shift. This wasn't closure. This was the beginning of something darker. The Carpenter twins had arrived at Cook City on July 19, 1992, driving a 1989 Toyota pickup registered to their father in Bozeman. They'd signed the wilderness permit logbook at the ranger station, planning a 5-day backpacking loop through the high country east of the Beartooth Highway. Emily had written in neat block letters: destination Lost Creek to Sky Pilot Creek, return via Kersey Lake, Esti return July 24th. The ranger on duty, Rita Mendez, remembered them clearly. Both women were experienced hikers, fit and prepared, carrying proper gear. They'd discussed weather patterns, bear protocol, and water sources. Nothing had seemed unusual. July 24th came and went. By the evening of July 25th, when the truck remained parked and unclaimed at the trailhead, Rita initiated a welfare check. The Carpenter's father, Robert, confirmed by phone that his daughters had not returned home. At 800 hours on July 26th, the incident command system was activated. Dennis had been assigned as Operations Section Chief. The search grid covered 40 square miles of alpine terrain, elevation ranging from 7,800 to 10,200 feet. They deployed 3 dog teams, 2 helicopter sweeps, and 26 ground personnel, divided into hasty teams and grid searches. The weather held clear, which was both blessing and curse. Good visibility, but also the withering heat of a Montana summer in drought. Day 1 yielded nothing. Day 2 brought the first discovery: a navy blue stuff sack containing a water filter and iodine tablets located 3 miles from the trailhead along Lost Creek. The coordinates were marked on the topographic map with a red circle. The gear was clean, undamaged, and matched the inventory Robert Carpenter provided of his daughter's equipment. It had been placed deliberately beside a trail marker, not dropped or lost. On day 3, searchers found a second item: a single leather hiking boot, women's size 7, lodged between rocks at a creek crossing 4 miles northeast of the first find. The boot was worn but intact, laces still tied. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, just the boot. Dennis stood in the operations tent that evening, studying the map under the hiss of a Coleman lantern. The finds didn't follow a logical progression. If the twins had been moving along the planned route, the boot should have appeared before the stuff sack. Instead, the spatial relationship suggested movement in multiple directions, or a deliberate attempt to lay a false trail. "What are we looking at here?" Rita asked, standing beside him with a mug of instant coffee. "I don't know yet," Dennis said, "but something's off." By day 5, expanded air reconnaissance using a Bell 206 helicopter spotted what appeared to be a tent or tarp configuration near Sky Pilot Creek, approximately 6 miles from the trailhead. Ground teams reached the location by mid-afternoon. What they found was the twins' campsite. 2 sleeping bags unzipped and laid flat, a small cooking stove with fuel canister still attached. Food hung properly in a bear bag 20 yards from the tent. The tent itself was staked correctly, no tears or damage. Inside were 2 backpacks containing clothing, first aid supplies, journals and personal items. Nothing appeared disturbed. The journals were logged as evidence and transported to the command post. Dennis read them that night, searching for anything unusual. Sarah's entries were matter-of-fact, recording mileage, weather, and wildlife sightings. Emily's were more introspective, describing the light on the mountains, the sound of water over stone. The final entry in both journals was dated July 21st, 1992. Emily had written, "Camped at Sky Pilot. Clear sky, cold night. Tomorrow we'll push for Kersey and loop back. E feels good about the route." That reference, "E feels good," struck Dennis as odd. Why would Emily refer to herself in third person, unless she meant someone else? But there had been no mention of a third hiker, no permits issued for anyone accompanying them. The search continued through July and into early August. Dog teams followed scent trails that doubled back, circled, and dead-ended at water sources. No further evidence was recovered. No bodies, no additional gear, no witnesses. On August 12, 1992, after 17 days and no credible leads, the search was suspended and transitioned to limited continuous status. The case remained open, but active operations ceased. Robert Carpenter had stood in the parking lot that final day, his face carved from stone. "You're telling me they just vanished?" "We're telling you we've exhausted immediate search options," Dennis replied. "But we're not giving up." 4 years passed. The case file gathered dust. And then Emily Carpenter walked out of the wilderness alone. The Benefice Hospital in Great Falls had a small, secure wing used for psychiatric evaluation and observation. Emily was admitted there under medical supervision on August 14, 1996, suffering from dehydration, malnutrition, exposure-related skin damage, and what the attending physician described as acute dissociative state. She was non-communicative except for the repeated utterance of her sister's name. Dennis made the 3-hour drive from his station to Great Falls on August 15th. He carried with him the original case file, now expanded to include intake reports from the medical team. Emily's physical condition suggested prolonged exposure to outdoor elements. Her skin was weathered, her hair long and tangled, her body weight approximately 30 pounds below the baseline from 1992. But there were no signs of acute trauma, no evidence of assault or restraint. Detective Laura Haynes from the Park County Sheriff's Office met Dennis in the hospital conference room. She was mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with the methodical air of someone who'd worked cold cases before. "She's stable now," Laura said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Vitals are improving, but she's not talking, not really. Not even to doctors. She answers yes or no questions sometimes, but when we ask about Sarah or where she's been, she just shuts down, rocks back and forth." Calls the name again. Dennis opened the folder. Inside were photographs taken during Emily's medical examination. The images showed scarring on her hands and forearms, consistent with outdoor survival. Scratches from brush, old cuts healed poorly, calluses from repetitive manual work. Her feet showed similar patterns, but there were also marks that didn't fit. Circular scars on both wrists, faded but distinct, approximately 1 inch in diameter. "Restraints?" Dennis asked. "That's what the doc thinks, but old ones, years old, not recent." They were granted supervised access to interview Emily that afternoon. The room was small, painted institutional beige, with a single window overlooking the parking lot. Emily sat in a chair near the window, dressed in hospital scrubs, her hands folded in her lap. When Dennis and Laura entered, she looked up briefly, then returned her gaze to the glass. Emily, Laura began, her voice gentle. I'm Detective Haynes. This is Ranger Wolf. We want to help you. Can you tell us where you've been? No response. Emily's lips moved silently. Can you tell us about Sarah? Dennis tried. Where is Sarah? At the mention of her sister's name, Emily's hands clenched. Sarah, she whispered. Sarah's waiting. Waiting where? In the trees. She's waiting in the trees. Which trees, Emily? Can you show us on a map? But Emily turned back to the window and said nothing more. Over the next 3 days, they attempted multiple interviews. Each session yielded fragments. Emily mentioned the cabin, the man with the radio, and 4 winters. She described being unable to leave, though she couldn't or wouldn't explain why. When asked if someone had held her against her will, she nodded. When asked who, she shut down completely. Forensic interviews with trained specialists fared slightly better. Using non-leading questions and cognitive interview techniques, they established a rough timeline. Emily and Sarah had been taken from their campsite on the night of July 21st or early morning of July 22nd, 1992. They had been held in a structure she described as small and dark with one door. She mentioned routine, repetition, cold winters, and isolation. She mentioned Sarah being sick, and she mentioned escape, though the specifics remained murky. On August 18, 1996, Emily drew a picture. It was crude, executed in crayon on butcher paper during an art therapy session. The image showed 2 stick figures inside a rectangle and a larger figure outside the rectangle. Surrounding the rectangle were triangular shapes, trees. In one corner, Emily had drawn a small square with lines radiating from it. When asked what the square represented, she said, "The radio. He listened to the radio." Dennis studied the drawing that evening. The radio detail was specific. In 1992, portable radios were common, AM/FM transistor units, some with shortwave capability. If Emily's captor had used a radio, it suggested a degree of isolation, someone living off-grid, away from electrical infrastructure, but still connected to broadcast signals. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On August 20th, a clerk at the Montana Historical Society contacted the sheriff's office regarding a newspaper article. She'd been following media coverage of Emily's reappearance and remembered a piece from 1993 about abandoned mining claims in the Beartooth Range. The article mentioned several remote cabin structures still standing on defunct claims, used occasionally by hunters or squatters. One such cabin, located near the headwaters of Wounded Man Creek, had been flagged by Forest Service personnel for removal, but never dismantled due to budget constraints. Dennis pulled USGS topographic maps and located Wounded Man Creek. It was approximately 14 miles northeast of Sky Pilot Creek, well outside the original search perimeter. The terrain was rugged, heavily forested, and accessible only by unmaintained trail or cross-country travel. If someone wanted to stay hidden, it was ideal. A recon team was organized for August 22nd. Dennis, Laura, 2 deputies, and a Forest Service law enforcement officer named Jack Purcell set out at dawn in 2 4-wheel-drive vehicles, driving as far as the deteriorating logging roads would allow before continuing on foot. They carried radios, topographic maps, compasses, evidence collection kits, and sidearms. The hike took 4 hours. The forest was dense, punctuated by deadfall and steep ravines. Navigation required constant reference to the map and compass readings, as the terrain bore little resemblance to trail markers or established routes. At approximately 12:30 hours, they reached a clearing near the creek, and there, set back against a rock face and screened by pines, was the cabin. It was small, perhaps 12 by 14 feet, constructed from rough-hewn logs with a corrugated metal roof. One window covered from inside with what appeared to be fabric. One door closed but not locked. Beside the cabin was a rusted wood stove, and scattered nearby were remnants of firewood, a metal bucket, and a length of chain attached to a stake driven into the ground. Dennis approached slowly, every sense alert. Laura flanked him, her hand near her holster. Jack moved to cover the window side. They announced their presence. "Park County Sheriff, anyone inside?" And received no response. Dennis pushed open the door. The interior was dark and smelled of earth and decay. As his eyes adjusted, details emerged. 2 cots along one wall, a table made from a split log, shelves holding canned goods and supplies. In the far corner was a battery-powered radio, a Panasonic RF-2200 sitting on a wooden crate. The batteries were corroded but still in place. On the table was a handwritten log, the pages yellowed and water-stained. Dennis picked it up carefully, handling it by the edges. The entries were sporadic, dating from August 1992 through June 1996. The handwriting was erratic, angular, obsessive. Names appeared repeatedly: Emily, Sarah, Annie. One entry dated September 15, 1992, read, "They're settling in. E is stubborn. S is compliant. I'll keep them safe here. No one will take them like they took Annie." Another, from January 1994, S is sick. Fever won't break. E wants to leave. I can't let her. Not yet. They need to understand. The final entry, dated June 9th, 1996. S is gone. I buried her by the creek. E won't stop crying. This wasn't supposed to happen. Dennis felt his chest tighten. He stepped outside and keyed his radio. "Base, this is Wolf. We've located a structure at Wounded Man Creek, evidence of confinement, requesting crime scene team and cadaver dog. We may have a burial site." The forensic team arrived by helicopter the following morning. The cabin and surrounding area were documented photographically using 35mm cameras with timestamp backs, each frame logged with corresponding notes. Evidence technicians wore gloves and used paper bags for collection, maintaining chain of custody protocols. Every item, the log, canned goods, the radio, fabric scraps, the chain and stake, was tagged, numbered, and transported to the state crime lab in Missoula. Meanwhile, the cadaver dog, a German shepherd named Trace, was deployed along the creek bank. At 14:45 hours, Trace alerted near a cluster of aspen trees 60 yards downstream from the cabin. The soil there had been disturbed, a depression approximately 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. Excavation began immediately, conducted with hand tools to preserve evidence. By late afternoon, they uncovered human remains at a depth of 18 inches. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, wrapped in a canvas tarp. Dental records would be required for positive identification, but the preliminary assessment, female, approximate age, mid to late 20s, blonde hair, matched Sarah Carpenter's description. Dennis stood at the edge of the excavation site as the sun dropped behind the ridge. 4 years. 4 years Emily had been held here, and Sarah had died here, and no one had known. The weight of it pressed down, like the gathering dark. "We need to find him," Laura said quietly, "whoever wrote that log." The log itself became the key. Analysis of the handwriting, combined with the content, suggested the author was male, educated, and mentally unstable. The references to Annie indicated a personal trauma or loss that predated the Carpenter abduction. The obsessive tone and themes of protection suggested delusional thinking, possibly paranoid or possessive delusions. Cross-referencing property records for the area yielded a name, Carl Dietrich. In 1987, he'd filed a quitclaim on a defunct mining claim near Wounded Man Creek, living there sporadically until 1993. Local records showed Dietrich had been a teacher at a rural elementary school in Park County until 1991, when he was dismissed following complaints about erratic behavior. His wife, Annie, had died in a car accident in 1990. They had no children. A warrant was issued for Karl Dietrich on August 24, 1996, on charges of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and suspicion of murder. But Dietrich was nowhere to be found. His last known address, a rental in Livingston, had been vacated in 1993. No bank accounts, no vehicle registration, no forwarding information. On August 26th, Emily was informed, gently and with therapeutic support, that her sister's remains had been recovered. She wept silently for an hour. Then she spoke, haltingly at first, then with increasing clarity. She described the night they were taken. They'd been asleep in their tent when Dietrich entered, holding a rifle. He forced them at gunpoint to gather their belongings, then marched them northeast through the dark. He'd scouted their campsite earlier, she believed, watching and waiting. He knew the terrain. He knew where he was taking them. At the cabin, he chained them initially, one chain for each wrist attached to bolts in the wall. He brought food, water, supplies. He talked to them, sometimes gently, sometimes with agitation. He called them by their names, but also by Annie, confusing them with his dead wife. He believed he was protecting them from some undefined threat. He believed they would eventually understand. Over time, the chains were removed, but the isolation remained. There was no escape. The forest was endless, and Dietrich had a rifle. He maintained routines, daily chores, rationed food, evening hours when he listened to the radio and read aloud from books. Sarah became ill in the winter of 1995, pneumonia likely, and despite Emily's pleas, Dietrich refused to seek medical help. Sarah died in February 1996. After Sarah's death, Dietrich grew erratic. He would disappear for days, then return disheveled and paranoid. In early August 1996, he told Emily he was leaving permanently. He gave her a choice, stay in the cabin or leave. But he warned her that if she left, she would be abandoning Sarah. Emily, confused and traumatized, stayed initially. But after Dietrich failed to return for several days, desperation overcame fear. She left, walking south and west, following water, until she stumbled onto Lost Creek Trail on August 14th. "Why didn't he just let you go?" Dennis asked. Emily's answer was quiet but steady. Because in his mind, letting us go meant losing us, like he lost Annie, and he couldn't survive that again. The search for Karl Dietrich intensified. His photograph, taken from his 1991 teacher ID, was distributed to law enforcement across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. He was 52 years old, 6 feet tall, brown hair graying at the temples, last known weight 170 pounds. Distinguishing features included a scar on his left forearm and a limp from a childhood injury. Tips came in sporadically. A gas station attendant in Cook City thought she'd seen him in July. A hunter near Jardine reported a man matching the description camping alone in May, but none led to concrete results. On September 3, 1996, Forest Service personnel conducting fire prevention patrol in the Absaroka Range discovered a campsite near Sheep Mountain, approximately 22 miles north of the cabin. The site was abandoned but recent. Cold ashes in a fire ring, food wrappers, a torn section of tarp, and a notebook, left inside a plastic bag weighted down with stones. The notebook was sent to the investigation team. Inside were more entries, written in the same angular hand as the cabin log. The entries were disjointed, rambling, alternating between lucidity and incoherence. One passage read, "I thought I could save them. I thought if I kept them safe away from the world they would see what I saw, that love is protection, that isolation is preservation. But S is gone, and E ran, and I am alone again. Annie is gone. They are all gone. I cannot do this anymore." The final entry, dated August 28, 1996. "I am going to the place where Annie and I were happy. Maybe I will find peace there." Dennis and Laura reviewed Dietrich's history, and Dietrich had died in a single vehicle accident on Highway 89 near Gardner in 1990. According to the accident report, she'd been returning from a hiking trip in the park. The couple had frequently hiked together near Rescue Creek and the Blacktail Plateau. Those areas became the new focus. On September 7th, a ranger patrolling the Blacktail Plateau Trail reported a vehicle parked at an access point, a 1985 Chevy Blazer, faded blue, Montana plates. A registration check confirmed it belonged to Carl Dietrich. A tactical team, including Dennis, Laura, 2 park rangers, and a crisis negotiator, approached the area on foot. They located Dietrich's campsite at approximately 1600 hours. He was sitting on a folding chair near a small fire, unarmed, staring into the flames. He looked thin, older than his photograph, hollow. "Carl Dietrich," Laura called out. "We need you to stand up slowly and keep your hands where we can see them." Dietrich looked up. For a moment his face registered nothing, then something like recognition flickered. "You found her," he said. Not a question, a statement. "We found both of them," Dennis replied. "Sarah is gone. Emily is alive. You need to come with us." Dietrich stood slowly. He made no move toward aggression, no attempt to flee. "I didn't mean for her to die," he said. "I tried to help her." "We can talk about that," Laura said, "but you need to come with us now." Dietrich complied. He was placed in handcuffs and escorted to a waiting vehicle. As they walked, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I thought I could keep them safe, like I couldn't keep Annie safe. But you can't stop death. You can only delay it." The trial of Carl Dietrich began in April 1997 in Park County District Court. He was charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and second-degree murder in the death of Sarah Carpenter. He pled not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the cabin, the log, the physical evidence of confinement, Emily's testimony, the forensic analysis of Sarah's remains. The defense argued that Dietrich suffered from severe delusional disorder, exacerbated by grief and trauma following his wife's death. Expert witnesses testified to his mental state, describing a man who genuinely believed he was protecting the twins, not harming them. Emily testified on May 12, 1997. She described 4 years of captivity, the fear and confusion, Sarah's decline and death, and the psychological manipulation Dietrich employed. But she also described moments when Dietrich had been gentle, even remorseful, caught in the grip of a delusion he could not escape. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On May 20, 1997, they returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. The court rejected the insanity defense, finding that while Dietrich was mentally ill, he understood the nature and consequences of his actions. He was sentenced to 45 years in the Montana State Prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. After sentencing, Dennis met with Emily one final time. They sat in a small park in Livingston, watching the Yellowstone River flow past. Emily had begun the slow process of rebuilding her life: therapy, reconnecting with her father, finding work in Bozeman. She was quiet, still carried the shadows, but there was a resilience in her that had endured. "Do you think he really believed he was helping us?" she asked. Dennis considered the question. "I think he believed it. Whether that makes it better or worse, I don't know." Emily nodded. "Sarah used to say that people are more complicated than good or evil. That we're all just trying to survive our own pain. Your sister was wise." "She was." Emily looked out at the water. "I still hear her sometimes, calling my name. I think I always will." The case file was closed officially on June 15, 1997. Sarah Carpenter's remains were cremated and interred beside her mother in a cemetery outside Bozeman. Emily attended the service, placing a single wildflower, Indian paintbrush, Sarah's favorite, on the grave marker. The cabin on Wounded Man Creek was dismantled by Forest Service crews in August 1997. The land was returned to wilderness, the scars of occupation fading slowly under new growth. The radio, the log, and other evidence items were retained in storage per legal protocols. Dennis returned to his duties as a ranger, but the case stayed with him. He thought about the search operation in 1992, the decisions made, the areas covered and not covered. Could they have found the cabin sooner? Could Sarah have been saved? The questions had no satisfying answers. In October 1998, Dennis received a letter from Emily. She wrote about her life, small victories, ongoing challenges. She wrote about forgiveness, not for Dietrich, but for herself, for surviving when Sarah didn't. And she wrote about the wilderness, how she'd returned to hiking, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. "The mountains don't hold fear for me anymore," she wrote. "They hold memory. And memory is something I can carry." Dennis kept the letter in his desk. It reminded him why the work mattered, not for the headlines or the statistics, but for the people, those lost, those found, those still searching. The truth, as it emerged through investigation and trial, was this. Carl Dietrich had observed the Carpenter twins during their preparation at the ranger station in July 1992. In his fractured mental state, their resemblance to each other and to his late wife triggered a delusional protective impulse. He tracked them to their campsite, abducted them, and held them in isolation, believing he was saving them from an unnamed threat. Sarah's death from untreated illness broke something final in him, leading to his eventual abandonment of the cabin and Emily's escape. The anomaly that had puzzled investigators, the scattered gear, the abandoned campsite, the 4-year gap, was explained not by supernatural intervention, but by human psychology at its most broken. The case became a training reference for search and rescue operations, emphasizing the importance of expanded perimeters and consideration of human behavior in missing person investigations. It underscored the reality that sometimes the answers lie not in the wild, but in the minds of those who move through it. Would you have made the same call if you'd been in their place? The wilderness has witnessed many things, some secrets it keeps forever, and some it releases only when the time is right. Emily Carpenter walked out of the forest after 4 years, carrying her sister's name on her lips. She survived not through luck or coincidence, but through endurance and the stubborn human will to live. Sarah's life ended in those woods, but her memory endures. In the records, in the testimony, and in the heart of a sister who refused to forget. What would you have done differently? If you appreciate real investigations like this one, subscribe and stay curious.